Be in the know with unlimited access to IBJ and Inside Indiana Business. Our in-depth coverage of all things business means you'll always be completely in the know. Subscribe for just $1 a week. Get started now at ibj.com/trial offer.
Off the Record with the Indiana 250 is presented by Prolific. When what worked stops working, I point purpose-driven leaders to Prolific, the growth firm. They turn plans into results with full-service marketing and strategy focused on outcomes, not vanity metrics. Head to prolifichq.com to learn more.
Say yes. I hear too often, well, I'm going to have to see if I have time and this and that. Just say yes. Saying yes will open opportunities. Supervisors, bosses, if they're asking you, it's because they need your help.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in Indiana. Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Geoffrey Mearns, the 17th president of Ball State University. Jeff was named president of Ball State in 2017 after serving for 5 years as president of Northern Kentucky University and for 7 years in a variety of administrative positions at Cleveland State University. Jeff was born in a college town, Charlottesville, Virginia, home of the University of Virginia, which is where he got his law degree after earning a degree in English at Yale. Before spending the last 20-plus years in academia, Jeff had a notable legal career that included serving as a federal prosecutor in the United States Department of Justice. While serving as an assistant U.S. attorney and chief of the organized crime and racketeering section in the Eastern District of New York, Jeff tried more than 20 criminal cases, including the prosecution of several high-ranking members of the Gambino organized crime family. Near the conclusion of his career in the Justice Department, he was appointed by Attorney General Janet Reno to serve as one of the principal lawyers in the high-profile prosecution of Terry Nichols, a co-conspirator in the 1995 bombing of the Alfred Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Jeff's time in academia has been just as noteworthy as his legal career. At Ball State, he's become known for successful initiatives on and off the university's Muncie campus. Under Jeff's leadership, Ball State has experienced record freshman enrollment, increased alumni engagement, and fundraising. He also focused on revitalizing the areas around the campus, including The Village, a commercial district adjacent to campus that includes a new performing arts center and a boutique hotel supported by a $35 million Lilly Endowment grant, at the time the largest gift in Ball State's history. Jeff is also the leader of an innovative community-wide partnership between Ball State and the Muncie Community Schools, whose aim is to improve the educational experience for all of Muncie's children. Since the partnership started, student enrollment in the district has stabilized, the district has balanced its budget, and compensation for teachers and staff has increased significantly. Jeff has also been involved in the governance of collegiate athletics, serving on several NCAA boards and committees. While at Yale, he was captain of the cross-country team and competed in indoor and outdoor track and field. After graduating from college, Jeff qualified for the 1984 Olympic marathon trials. When Jeff isn't filling his time with all things Ball State and Muncie, he has a big family, one of 8 siblings. Jeff and his wife have 5 adult children of their own. Jeff, that's a lot of incredible experience and history I'm excited to talk to you about, but welcome to Off the Record podcast, and really appreciate you being here today.
Well, Nate, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, this is going to be fun. Well, I always start at the beginning of one's career, and as I mentioned, you come from a big family, and raised with lots of siblings, and now you're responsible and have been for 9 years for guiding lots of young people at Ball State University. Talk about maybe some of the lessons you learned growing up, being a part of a big family, and how, if at all, it translated into the job you're doing today.
Sure. As you said, yeah, I have 7 sisters and 1 brother.
Yeah.
So grew up in a large family. it was a large and loving family, but also a pretty competitive family. You mentioned in the intro, I was a competitive distance runner. A lot of my siblings and my father were also competitive athletes. So I learned to get along with people, learned to engage with people. But probably the two most important lessons are the ones I learned from my parents. My father was the first in our family to go to college. His father was a nightclub singer. His mother was a secretary. And that one educational opportunity that he had to go to college changed the trajectory of his life, changed the whole trajectory of our family. And as a result, after he graduated from law school, he was a law professor for 40 years. So he committed himself to education. So I learned sitting around the dinner table, the intersection of law and education. The second is my mother. So my mother attended college, but didn't graduate from college because they got married when she was 19, and then she proceeded to have 19 kids. Excuse me, 9 kids. But as my youngest siblings were growing up, my mother then served 10 years on the Shaker Heights City Council. Shaker Heights is an inner-rig suburb just to the east of Cleveland. And then she was the first woman to serve as the mayor of Shaker Heights.
Oh, wow.
So I learned from her the importance of community service, community engagement. And so I feel what I'm doing at Ball State is the intersection of my father's profession and passion and my mother's passion as well.
That's fascinating. You had some real leaders in your family, and
I did.
You mentioned the competition among siblings, and I wanted to talk to you about it because it's rare that I get to talk to somebody who tried out for the Olympics, and in 1984, I bet there were some incredible competition in that regard. But talk about being an athlete, and especially as a marathon runner. I've always understood that there obviously is a physical component to that, but there is it must be a major mental component, and being able to push through what you think are your limits. I'm assuming, but I would love for you to hear from you, like how that experience of being a marathon runner and being as competitive as you were, impacted you and throughout your career and leadership positions you've been involved in.
Sure. So I can remember very clearly the moment when I wanted to become a competitive distance runner and a marathoner. It was September of 1972. I had just turned 13 years old, and I watched with my father. I watched Frank Shorter win the gold medal in the Olympic marathon on behalf of the United States, the first American to win a gold medal. And I turned to my father. I said, "That's what I want to do. I want to represent the United States in the Olympics." Sounds crazy, but we had that conversation. And my father, instead of, saying or thinking, you're crazy, he then started to guide me to say, okay, if that's what you want to do, you got to put in the work. You've got to have the discipline and determination and patience and persistence. And so that was really some of my motivation all through middle school and high school, college, and beyond, was to set that goal. So I learned the importance of setting ambitious goals and then doing the hard work to achieve them.
Yeah.
The second thing the related thing that I learned is, so I qualified for the 84 trials by a marathon I ran in November of 1983. The Olympic trials were over Memorial Day weekend in May of 84. And about 6 weeks before the marathon, I started to feel a little pain in my left heel. And about 2 weeks later, I was diagnosed with a stress fracture. So I watched that marathon that I had been dreaming about and preparing for 12, 13 years. I watched it on a little black and white television set. So I learned from that not to shrink from setting ambitious goals, but understanding that the process of trying to achieve them can teach you a lot of lessons. And so I used some of that. The pandemic was, again, one of these extraordinarily unexpected events. And I remember having conversations with the leadership team as we were on a day-to-day basis, like all of us, adjusting to those challenges, figuring out how we could continue to deliver educational experiences for our students, notwithstanding these unprecedented disruptions. And I compared it to a marathon, except in this instance, we didn't know where the finish line was going to be.
Right.
Whereas in a marathon, you know where it's going to be, 26.2 miles. We didn't know where this finish line was going to be. But what I said to my team was, but we'll only get there if we continue to put one foot in front of the other, if we continue to persist. And so I think my experience as a distance runner, as a marathoner, about pushing through those moments of disappointment to get to the finish line helped us endure that and continue to deliver on our promise to our students.
I'm sure that's incredible experience. So one of the other incredible experiences that you've had in your career, which I mentioned in the intro, was being, of course, a lawyer, but working for the Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor, and being involved with not only I mentioned the Oklahoma City bombing, which we're going to talk more about in a minute, but you were involved in New York with some very high profile cases with the Gambino crime family. These are, talk about like high pressure situations and challenging situations. I think about the challenges that higher education has gone through, but I think about all the experiences and challenges as an athlete, and then in the courtroom and preparing to prosecute major cases like these. Talk a little bit about that, being under that type of pressure, and what that was like, and maybe lessons learned.
Yeah. So as you said, I was an assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York. Just so the folks who are listening, that's Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and all of Long Island. So this was 1989 to about 1995. So prosecuting mobsters in Brooklyn and Queens in that period of time, as I like to say, it was a target-rich environment.
Yeah.
And I was assigned to do almost exclusively cases for the Gambino family. And as you may know, that was the family that John Gotti led. I successfully prosecuted Tommy Gambino. I successfully prosecuted the juror who took the bribe in the first federal prosecution of John Gotti. And so some of what we talked about athletics applies in that setting as well. These were difficult, challenging, complex cases with very strong adversaries. I mean, these mobsters had the resources to hire some of the best lawyers in New York City. But it was about preparation. It was about meticulous preparation. It was about performing under pressure. It was about adjusting to unexpected developments and staying poised. So it was a great experience. The other piece was there was a group of us in that period of time, probably about 10, 12, 14 lawyers and another group of agents, and we were a team. We worked very hard, but we were committed to each other's success. We were committed to the success of the objective of our prosecution and not about our own self-promotion. So it was perhaps one of the greatest teams I've ever had the opportunity to be a member of. And Jennifer and I lived right in Brooklyn. I would walk home from work through neighborhoods where some of the defendants in our cases lived or went to restaurants. So it was an interesting experience.
Did you ever worry about your own personal security? I mean, I would assume that, it would feel like that could be a worry, but was that something that you worried about?
Frankly, no. And the reason is, and this is a bit different, we'll talk about Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols in just a minute maybe, but, for the mobsters, it's a business. And they understand there are certain rules and that we abide by. One of the first cases I worked on illustrated what happens when they breach some of those rules. It was a case of a guy named Gus Ferracci, who was a low-level mobster in a different crime family, and he murdered an undercover DEA agent. And as soon as that news went out, the law enforcement approach to finding Gus Ferracci was radically different than the usual approach. And so there actually was a made-for-TV movie in the early 1990s called The Hunt for Gus Ferracci, and it was about the two parallel attempts to locate him because he was a fugitive. One was the law enforcement attempt, and the other were the mobsters trying to find him. The mobsters got him first and killed him.
Wow.
So all of that is to say the notion of injuring an agent or an agent's family or a prosecutor was anathema to them because of the response.
Sure.
But Sammy Gravano, who was John Gotti's number 2, who testified in 3 trials for me, including that juror that I mentioned. And what Gambino explained is that while the mafia wanted innocent people to be afraid of them, judges, jurors, witnesses, that the mafia wouldn't cross the line if that other person didn't cross the line. But as he said is, now if you cross the line and join them, then you have agreed to abide by their rules, and including what the consequences are for violating those rules. So he was pretty clear about that.
I mean, I could go on all these topics for
Sure.
a lot of time, but I want to cover more ground. But it's just fascinating that you have had that type of an experience. So I do want to talk about, what was one of the most devastating tragedies in our country. It was the Oklahoma City bombing, and I've been fortunate enough to see the memorial that's been built since then. And it is so touching. And of course, most of us that were paying attention and were alive back then remember that there was a daycare center right there. So lots of kids, unfortunately, were killed. And I remember, like as yesterday, the names, Timothy McVeigh, who was, I know, executed and was the prime suspect and committed the crime. But you were involved with going after prosecuting his co-conspirator, which was Terry Nichols. And so I'd love to, hear from you about that experience, but and how being associated, like right in the right in the middle of a case that had such profound loss for our country, the national attention that it brought. And how that affected you personally, during the trial. That must have been incredibly challenging and difficult. And even after, I'm curious, like just what the impact of that kind of involvement would be.
Yeah, so the Oklahoma City bombing, which occurred in 1995, was and still is the worst act of domestic terrorism in the history of the United States. 168 people were killed that day, not to mention hundreds of others other people who were injured. And as you mentioned, Timothy McVeigh delivered the truck bomb that he and Terry Nichols had assembled, delivered and detonated that truck bomb within about 200 feet of a daycare center, killed 19 children. The daycare center was called America's Kids. So they literally attacked a daycare center that had the name of our country, in it. So it was an extraordinarily complex prosecution, both legally and factually. It was emotionally difficult because throughout the first and second phases of the trial, we would put on witnesses who these were people who were either injured or who lost loved ones. They were children who lost parents. They were parents who lost children. They were workers in the building who lost colleagues. So it was emotionally draining. It was also, every day walking in and out of the courthouse, we'd walk a gauntlet of reporters and news cameras
Sure.
and microphones, because every major news organization in the world was covering the trial. But to those of us who worked on the case, the most memorable experience is having the honor of representing the United States of America in that case, and the honor of representing the people of Oklahoma City who lost their loved ones. It's hard to describe the responsibility you feel.
Yeah.
And it would take me a long time to describe the extraordinary support that we received from the victims and their families, the compassion that they gave to us. These were people, as I said, lost the most precious things in their lives, and yet they were concerned about our welfare, about our families. And I take those memories with me because, as I will share at commencement on Saturday, one of the things I'll remind our graduates as they head off into their new life is, yes, you want a career, but never forget that life is a precious gift. Yeah. And many of us believe that it's a gift that we share with other people in service to other people. Yeah. And the last thing I would say is, I suspect many of the folks who are listening know Larry Mackey, prominent lawyer here in Indianapolis. He was actually the lead prosecutor in the Terry Nichols case. So I worked under Larry. He is an unsung American hero. The sacrifices that he and his family made for him to serve both on the McVeigh case and the Nichols case, that work was spanned 3 or 4 years where he was away from home, living in Denver, Colorado, the work ethic that he exhibited. So if you see Larry Mackey, tell him on behalf of the United States of America how much we appreciate his service and the sacrifices that his family made to allow him to serve our country.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I want to, talk to you a little bit about you're involved in some of the most, high profile cases in our country. And obviously you're a rising star and a star in the legal profession. And, you're being asked by and working with people like Merrick Garland and the Attorney General to represent the United States. Of course, Merrick Garland would go on to become Attorney General under President Biden, and I think you had some work with him. So you're working with some of the brightest legal minds our country's produced, and doing incredible service yourself on behalf of our country. So thank you for doing that. But you decide you're going to pivot at some point and move into a different line of work, of course, and go work in academia. So talk a little bit about how you came to that decision, and especially when you could have continued on the path that you were on in the legal profession.
Yeah, so it wasn't anything I planned or anything I expected. I was minding my own business. At that time, I had left the Justice Department. I was working for a large international law firm in Cleveland, Ohio, and got an email from somebody who was on the search committee to find a new dean of the law school at Cleveland State University, and had indicated that that I was nominated by a federal judge in Cleveland as a possible candidate. As I mentioned, my father was a law professor for 40 years. He was the dean of the law school at the University of Cincinnati. I jokingly thought they might have been looking for him as opposed to me, but he had been retired at that point. Again, so it was not anything I ever had contemplated. I decided after some reflection to submit an application because it was the intersection of two things that I mentioned earlier. It was the intersection of legal education at a public university, and also the law school at Cleveland State is very much engaged in the community, in the city of Cleveland and in Northeast Ohio. So I thought it would enable me to do for maybe 4, 5, or 6 years, do those two things together. At that time, I thought even if I got the job, again, I'd probably do it for a short period of time and then go back to practice law, maybe go back to the Justice Department, maybe be a judge, something like that. And so it was a very rewarding experience. And then 4 years into it, a new president was appointed at Cleveland State, and he asked me to serve as the provost. And my initial reaction was no.
Yeah.
I don't want to be provost because that's another step that would take me down the road of staying into higher education. But Ron Berkman, who was that person, was pretty persuasive. And the reason I paused was because I knew at that point, it wasn't that I could never go back to being a lawyer or going to be back in that profession, but I just thought it was much more likely that I would stay in higher education. I made the choice, and of course, that is what's happened, and it opened up even more doors for me to, I was the provost for about 3 years, and it's been tremendously rewarding. Happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk about you're president of Northern Kentucky University. So like you said, you can stay on in higher education and an opportunity to develop there. But I'd love to kind of fast forward a little bit to your current role at Ball State. And what was it that you saw? Because you've now been at Ball State 9 years. You're one of the few that decide to stick around that long, because a lot of presidents don't make it that long. If I have it right, it's the average president is usually has a tenure of 3 to 3.5 years, perhaps these days.
Yeah, our life expectancy has gotten much shorter over the last 10 years.
Well, that's right. But what was it initially about the Ball State opportunity that caught your attention?
So I knew about Ball State, but I didn't know much about Ball State. What attracted me and Jennifer to pursue this opportunity and why we feel so fortunate to have it was, one is Ball State is much more of a traditional residential campus. Cleveland State and Northern Kentucky, much more of a mix of some residential, but some commuter. There were things about being associated with a residential campus, Division I sports, FBS football, arts and those things, and much more vibrant campus life that was attracted. The campus, as you know, Nate, is beautiful. That was not only attractive because it was aesthetically pleasant, but because it indicated to me that the state of Indiana, through the General Assembly and the governor over years, had been investing in public higher education in Indiana, which many other states are facing some challenges. Indiana, our elected officials have generally been very supportive of higher education. The other thing that really, though, attracted to me were the values. You probably know, and on the little pennant here is the iconic symbol of Ball State, the Statue of Beneficence, which means doing good for other people through philanthropy and service. But I learned about the values of the institution that are represented by beneficence. And frankly, those are the values that my parents wanted to instill in their 9 children. Those are the values that Jennifer and I hope to instill in our 5 children and now our 5 grandchildren. And so we came to the conclusion that if we could find a place that was professionally attractive, but also resonated with us in terms of culture and character, that was a great fit. And it has been for us for nearly 9 years now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So before we take a break, I want to talk to you about, in the state of Indiana, you got you have great public universities. 2 of them tend to get a lot of the attention, Indiana University and Purdue University. And we've got a lot of great ones that are a lot much more beyond those two. But how do you position Ball State, in terms of that dynamic that often, tends, and of course in Muncie, Ball State incredibly well known. But if you're in Indy or Evansville or South Bend, that has campuses that from IU or Purdue, that are throughout the state. How do you position Ball State in the state of Indiana? Yeah.
So one of the things those who are listening is I believe we're very fortunate in Indiana because we have appropriate differences and diversity among our public higher education institutions. We have geographical diversity in terms of where West Lafayette is and Bloomington, where we are versus Indiana State and USI. But we also have different lanes, right? So there are 3 public research universities. There's Bloomington, West Lafayette, and Ball State. But IU and Purdue are R1, flagship Big Ten institutions. We're an R2, which means we confer doctoral degrees and we produce a high level of research, but we're not that model. So we really like the lane we're in, which is also then different than USI and Indiana State. So we get attention by not trying to replicate what those 2 very strong R1, Big Ten institutions are. We believe we have the same range of academic programs, the same quality of educational experiences, but it's a different educational experiences because our classes are smaller. The vast majority of our undergraduate classes are taught by full-time faculty, which isn't always the case at an R1 institution. So if a prospective student wants that R1 experience, God bless them. That's not what we provide. But if they want a quality educational experience with a slightly different approach, then Ball State is the right size. We're about 22,000 students. So still very large, very diverse, but not 40 or 50,000 students that you might find on a campus at Bloomington or West Lafayette.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, we're very fortunate as a state to have incredible universities, colleges, universities, and each one does have a little different specialty. I mean, there's schools at Ball State that are incredibly well known nationally. I think of, I'm in the media business. I think of the school that you have that is just incredibly well known around media and different types of media. It's got a great reputation.
Yeah, so 2 points. One was we do have nationally recognized programs. I mean, our College of Architecture,
Right.
those programs are the best undergraduate architecture programs in the state of Indiana and possibly throughout the Midwest. Our sports media and production program is the number one ranked program in the country.
Yeah,
we just surpassed Syracuse, who had historically been the best in the country. Our theater and dance and our musical theater program is a top 10 program in the country. The second thing I would say is I know a lot of your listeners lead businesses and engage with our elected officials. There sometimes is a tendency among elected officials to want us to be homogeneous. That is, should we all recruit Indiana students or should we all have the same programs? And I would encourage them when they're speaking to elected officials, no, let's double down on our geographic diversity and the range of institutions. That serves the state better. For example, I came from Northeast Ohio. If you know the higher education environment in Northeast Ohio, you have Cleveland State University, University of Akron, Kent State University, and Youngstown State University. If you drop a pin geographically in the middle of those four institutions, you can get to any one of them in about 35 minutes. And they all have virtually an identical mission. So they're cannibalizing each other for enrollment, for business engagement and support. We have geographic diversity and mission differentiation, which is a good thing, and we should continue to support that.
Absolutely. Well, more ahead with Ball State University President Geoffrey Mearns when we return to Off the Record podcast presented by Prolific. Stay with us. Most organizations hit a point where growth stalls. The message blends in, the site stops converting, the pipeline softens. That's when I tell leaders about Prolific, the growth firm for purpose-driven leaders. Through full-service marketing and strategy, they clarify the story, rebuild your go-to-market, and drive sales. Most importantly, Prolific holds itself accountable to the metrics that matter to you. If you're ready for your next growth stage, learn more about Prolific at prolifichq.com. Welcome back to Off the Record podcast. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and I'm talking today with Geoffrey Mearns, president of Ball State University. Well, President Mearns, when you arrived 9 years ago, what areas of the university did you say, gosh, there's an opportunity here to take it to the next level? What if you when you look back and you say, gosh, 9 years, here's some things that we addressed right away, and here's some things that we have taken to world-class level.
Yeah, so you probably recall, Nate, that Joanne Gora was the president of Ball State from about 2004 to 2014. And then there was a kind of a protracted transition in leadership until I arrived in May of 17. So really the first objective that I had was to reassure our faculty and staff and our alumni that the institution was strong. I remember the first major convocation address that I shared, the core message was, as the new person who had just spent a couple months acclimating to campus, you are much stronger than you think you are. And you have gone through this protracted transition in leadership, and you're emerging from it strong. And I celebrated a lot of statistics and other programs to demonstrate that point. And so I think we got ourselves back on an even keel. The other thing that I did relatively quickly was to have a collaborative process to develop a long-term strategic plan. And you may have seen our strategic plan. It is actually called Destination 2040. We took a somewhat unusual approach to say, let us set 5 long-term goals that we want to achieve by 2040. And then let's develop a set of strategies that we want to implement over the next 5 years to make measurable progress towards those goals. And some people were perplexed and they were saying, wait, it's 2018, 2019, and you're setting goals for 2040. And my answer to that question or that skepticism was, virtually all of the investments we make at a university are long-term investments. When we design and build a building, that building is going to be there for 30, 40, or 50 years. It may have to be renovated or adapted. And also the people we hire, whether it's faculty or staff, we hope they're going to be with us for 20, 30, or 40 years. Our faculty and our staff are very loyal and stay a long time. So what what I communicated was, if the investments we make are long-term investments, shouldn't we have a sense of where we want to be during that period of time? Now, of course, we have 5-year increments that we're going to adjust along the way, and we just refresh that strategic plan. So that, I think, was the next important thing that I had to do, was get support for, let's set ambitious goals for a long period, and let's just continue to do the work. Maybe it's a reflection back on that marathon, because I picked the longest race to run too.
I like that, though. I mean, I like the rationale that you just laid out for why you need to look a little longer than.
And we're going to keep revisiting it, and we did every 5 years to see whether those goals are still viable.
Right.
And during that process, they reaffirmed, vast majority of people, faculty, staff, students, alumni, reaffirmed that we were on the right track.
I bet you didn't have. I don't know if you did. Maybe people were talking about AI in 2017, 2018, but I bet you've had to take a look at the, that piece.
Exactly. So we didn't have a strategic imperative, a strategy around AI in 2018 or 2019, but in the plan that we approved in 2024, you sure bet we have an AI and artificial intelligence. And so there are adjustments that we make along the way.
It's really neat. So I want to talk to you about this education cliff. We talk about, we read about, I think I started hearing about this from education leaders 6-7 years ago, maybe around the same time we're talking about when you started your planning process, which means that we've peaked at the number of kids graduating from high school from just purely demographics in America. And I think it's 2026 or this year, next year, when we're peaking. And after that, we'll start to see less, just based on the number of babies that have been born, less people attending college. Now we're also seeing on top of that, and I'm sure you have some experience in this, and I know our state in general is seeing that, especially among young men, fewer and fewer looking at higher education, or kind of dropping out in general from the workforce, and so not pursuing further education in many cases. And then on top of that, the third thing is the value of higher education is being questioned like no other time, maybe in my lifetime. When I grew up, all I heard was, you got to go to college, you got to go to college. And now the drumbeat's the pendulum has kind of swung almost the opposite direction. And that's a challenge for higher education to say, this is why higher education matters. And I think even for our own state, it matters a great deal. And lots of voices in different directions. I'm curious, with all those forces in society and in our state, how you're navigating it.
So it was about 10 years ago that phrase of the demographic cliff was coined. And you're right. All you need to do is look at the number of babies who were born, and you can tell 18 years later how many are likely to be, graduating from college. So we could see this coming. I think the data is now suggesting that it's not so much a cliff as a decline. So those numbers will go down. And as you say, it's compounded by a decline in the college going rate because of the skepticism about a college degree. That demographic decline is not going to be as pronounced in Indiana as it is in Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, in the states that are immediately adjacent to us. But it's happening. Mm-hmm. And then those states are going to try to cannibalize our high school students. So it is a challenge for us. What are we doing about it? At Ball State, what we are now doubling down on is something I said before. To endure and thrive in this more challenging environment, you have to have a distinctive brand. You have to show how you're different. If you're just part of that muddled, indistinguishable, mass of institutions, you're in trouble. But if you can show that you've got some value that is different and distinctive, you'll do well, which is why our enrollment since the pandemic has continued to grow. Not dramatically, but if you consider those demographic trends and the college going rate, we're substantially outperforming the demographics. Yeah. What I would say is we are directly answering that question of what is the value of going to a college degree. You're familiar with the Carnegie Foundation. Mm-hmm. They're probably the leading organization in the country that classifies colleges and universities across various dimensions. A little over a year ago, they created a new designation called the Opportunity College and University. And it was created to answer that specific question is, does earning a college degree at a particular institution produce measurable value? And it was unlike U.S. News and World Report, which a lot of people follow. Some of the factors in U.S. News and World Report rankings are based upon subjective peer assessments. The Carnegie is all data-driven. And their complicated formula boiled down really to two factors. Does your student population reflect the demographics of your state in terms of socioeconomic factors and the like? That is, are you representing your state? The second factor is, can you show 8 years after graduation that your graduates earn at least 50% or more on average than people in their state without a college degree, right? Directly answering that question. We're the only public university in the state of Indiana to have met that Carnegie definition to be an opportunity college and university.
Wow.
So we believe I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it with your audience. We're doubling down on that. Doesn't mean we're necessarily better we're not saying we're the best, but what we're saying is we have data and an external validation from a nationally recognized organization that we are answering that question, that earning a degree for the vast majority of our graduates is a very good investment. And when you consider our in-state tuition, 90% of our undergraduate students are Indiana residents. Our sticker price is $10,000. A significant percentage of our graduates don't borrow any money to graduate from Ball State. Of those who do borrow, the median debt is somewhere between $28,000 and $30,000. The average car price in the United States is now $50,000, right?
Wow.
So the debt to get a Ball State degree is almost half of what it is the price of a car. We think that's a really good investment for the vast majority of people who want a quality education like the one that we provide. So we're trying to answer that question and want to get that message out.
It's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. It's an awesome ranking. I'm going to check into that because that's a unique metric. Those are unique metrics that they're measuring.
And it's an external validation that's all based upon objective data.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. So I want to talk about the impact that you, as the leader of Ball State, and Ball State has had on the community of Muncie, because you have really led in that regard. More, I'd say this. I mean, it's been something very, very special for the county, for Delaware County, for Muncie. And that's the engagement you've had with the school system. And I mentioned in the intro, the positive things that happened there. That was a school system that was really having difficulty, and you and the university stepped in. And then talk a little bit about what's referred to as the built environment, but essentially the investments that are being made, not just on campus but outside the campus, that are positively impacting the entire community. Yeah.
So when I was interviewing for the position as president at Ball State, I had a very frank conversation with the trustees during the interview process. And what I said in essence was, if you're looking for the next president to be confined to the four corners of the campus, I'm not interested. I said, I believe a public university has a community engagement responsibility. And so if you hire me, we are going to double down on our commitment to serving the community. And they were all in favor of it. The reason I said it was so important for us is, we were created in 1918 by the Ball brothers at a time when Muncie was thriving, the business community, manufacturing community.
Yeah.
And yet they created Ball State. Now, with the decline of manufacturing and the changes in the economy since the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the roles are reversed. Mm-hmm. We're a thriving educational institution in a community that is just beginning to turn the corner in terms of revitalization. So I believed we had not just an institutional interest in supporting the vibrancy of Muncie and Delaware County, but that we had a moral obligation to do that. And so that's what led us to take on this responsibility in 2018 to partner with the Muncie Community Schools. It's why we have created the Village Revitalization Project, which collectively between philanthropy, private investment and university investment. The first phase of it is about a $195 million revitalization project. We're grateful to the Lilly Endowment as part of their campus and community collaboration initiative a few years ago. We received $35 million. It was not only the largest gift at that time in our history, it was the largest grant that the Lilly Endowment made to any institution in the state as part of that initiative. Wow. Another external validation of what our vision for that project is all about. Mm-hmm. And so we're contributing to other organizations and individuals in Muncie and Delaware County who are continuing to make progress on the revitalization of our schools and our community. And it's very gratifying to play a part in that.
Yeah, and you have. I mean, it's tremendous for the community how you dove in and helped in areas that the community really needed the help. So that's wonderful. So I want to switch gears to college sports.
Yeah,
and
nothing going on in college sports these days. It's all status quo, right?
Absolutely. It's a wild time in college sports. So much change so quickly. You've been involved with the NCAA and served in different capacities and committees. Of course, today we've got the portal process when it comes to major college sports like football and basketball. And we've got student athletes, earning significant sums in some cases and in other cases, not so much. But I'm curious from your perspective. We talked about the universities in our state and each playing different roles. How does Ball State and how do you approach this quickly changing landscape? And as part of that question, is it sustainable what we're seeing today?
Yeah. So, first of all, as you said, have been, continue to be very involved in NCAA governance issues. And I commit a significant portion of my time because I believe that the enterprise of college sports, of intercollegiate sports, is so important to our country. Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, says it much better than I do, but it is hard to imagine that there's a greater engine for human development and leadership development than participating in college sports. And there's a lot of statistics to bear that out. So those of us who care about this enterprise are working very hard to try to preserve it, notwithstanding the pressures that we're facing. At Ball State, I'm going to get to your sustainability question in just a second. At Ball State, we recognize that we need to invest more in the revenue sports, so to speak. FBS football, men's basketball, maybe women's basketball. But my commitment is that we want to ensure that every one of our student athletes has an opportunity to compete and excel at Division I sports. So yes, we have to make some strategic decisions, but we're not going to do that at the expense of other sports. And that was recently validated. The Mid-American Conference every year gives out the Cartwright Award. And it's actually selected by the peers. Every institution has a member of that selection committee. And it's based upon competitive excellence across all sport programs. It's based upon academic excellence across all student athletes and all sports programs, and character and sportsmanship. And last academic year, we won the Cartwright Award for the first time in the history of Ball State, which shows that our commitment to all of those sports is important. The last thing I would say is, no, it's not sustainable. And by the way, it's not just that it's not sustainable for Ball State or institutions in the MAC. It's not sustainable for many other institutions that people on the surface are looking at and say, well, they have unlimited sources of revenue. Ohio State is reducing its investments and budgets for some sports so that they can invest more in football and men's basketball. The University of Arkansas in the SEC just announced that they're eliminating their tennis program, right, in order to continue to compete at football. Institutions are borrowing huge amounts of money to build larger football stadiums, to give these NIL contracts and revenue sharing contracts. And donors are going to have fatigue because it's not like asking for $5 million to help build a new strength and conditioning center. Right. Which is a one-time multi-year pledge. but they're coming to donors saying, I'm going to need $1 million every year, or I'm going to need $500,000 every year. And that number, 500,000 this year, is going to be 750,000 next year. It is not sustainable. The TV market is at some point going to plateau. When that reckoning comes, and what happens when that reckoning comes, remains to be seen. But I hope that we can bring some stability and order, because if it collapses, the consequences for our country will be very significant, because what the investments that are being reduced are in our Olympic teams. And one of the main reasons that the United States excels across all sports in the Olympics is because our colleges, intercollegiate sports, is the farm system for those sports. So if we don't fix it, we're going to see our international position in the Olympics start to decline, and that would be a bad day.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind when you were describing that. The first is, I could have asked you, what do you think of our national debt? The way you were describing the ticking time bomb, it was almost, it's similar to how I hear people describe what's going to happen if we don't do something about correcting our national debt. And it feels quite similar. And the consequences that you mentioned, I noticed, we just got done a couple months ago with the Winter Olympics, and somebody made one of the commentators made a comment, the United States is leading, especially women in women's sports, are cleaning up. America does a great job, and a lot of the gold medalists are women, or more than men. And to this point, we know that there's going to be less investment going into women's sports as a result of what's happening today.
And young people great athletes come from all over the world to compete in our college sports. And it's happening at premier institutions all across. I mean, we had 5 women on our women's basketball team this year, first-year students from international countries, all competed on their U20 national team, and they came to Ball State to compete in women's basketball. We had a swimmer who was the best 500-meter swimmer in the history of the MAC. She's going to be on the Canadian Olympic team in a couple years, right? Yeah. And that's happening all across our country. We can't allow...
So one of the other... you have a lot of people who are in your position at other universities who agree with you 100%, even though they are doing well in with sports in general, that they believe it's the current situation is not sustainable. I heard, I'll just say the name, Frank McCaffrey, Frank's not the right, McCaffrey, the coach, former coach of Iowa, now the coach at University of Pennsylvania, say that he believes that the outcry for change really will likely come, and the voices will get louder from the academic world, meaning that dollars that would go to fund departments and investments like we're describing, now some of that money is being funneled to sports, and eventually there's going to be an outcry. And he believes that the academic community needs to stand up because there's limited dollars, as you've described, and less eventually may not go to things we really need to spend time on.
So I won't name the institution.
Yeah.
It's a Big Ten institution. It is not one of the Big Ten institutions in the state of Indiana. It's an institution that for nearly a decade has had financial challenges to support their academic enterprise. And yet they're investing $600 million to renovate their existing football stadium.
Wow.
A venue that they will use 6 times a year.
Unreal. Yeah. Right.
It's just unsustainable.
That puts it in perspective, right? Well, I want to wrap up by talking about, and this is, by the way, it's been an incredible conversation. And I could go on like another couple hours, but so we might have to have a part 2 at some point. But as I mentioned at some point earlier, you're in rare air, being, now moving into, what will be your 10th year, a decade, leading Ball State, a major public university in this country, when people in your position don't last that long. And most of the time, I mean, it's very rare. Talk about what has kept you in the position for so long, and what goals do you have left to accomplish?
Yes. So I feel whenever I stand in front of a podium and speak to a small group or a large group, I always say that I have the great good fortune to serve as the president of Ball State. And I feel that quite genuinely. The character of our people that are represented by those values of beneficence is quite genuine. As we know, the values dictate the character of a person, and the culture of an organization is the collective character of its people. And the culture on our campus is truly distinctive. And I'm grateful for the commitment of our faculty and staff to our distinctive mission. Our students, what I like to say about our students, they don't come to our campus with a sense of entitlement. They come with a sense of purpose. So to be a part of an institution that is helping them find that purpose, to find fulfillment in their work and meaning in their life is so gratifying to me. We've got an outstanding board of trustees, and I'm grateful to the succession of governors that have put 9 exceptional people. They are all committed to the mission of our university. Our alumni and donors and benefactors have stepped up with an historic fundraising campaign. They're giving generously of their personal wealth to support our students. So I feel fortunate to be heading into my 10th year and couldn't really imagine being anywhere else. As you might imagine, when you get 4 or 5 years into this and you've had some success, you get calls and emails about other opportunities that maybe from the outside look more attractive or more prestigious or higher profile, whatever you want to say. And I've turned them all down for the last 5 years because I know how fortunate I am to be at a special place like Ball State right here in the state of Indiana.
Neat. And so is there, when you look forward, is there 1 or 2 like big rocks, as they say, that you'd like to accomplish?
Well, now that I saw that the Hoosiers won the CFP championship, maybe we can set that as our next. Just kidding. I don't think that's a great accomplishment. We're not heading that way. I think my goal is to continue to sustain that commitment to our long-term strategic plan, to continue to double down on being distinctive, of providing that distinctive educational experience, because I believe the institutions, public and private, that can't distinguish themselves in a meaningful way are going to face the challenges you just described. So we're going to continue to make sometimes difficult and sometimes strategic choices about mission differentiation because being distinctive is so important. And I don't want to retreat on that. Yeah. But we're going to continue to be accessible, affordable, and produce great outcomes.
Awesome. Well, we've come to the time near the end where I asked you. It's a tradition on off the
rapid
record,
fire questions,
a little rapid fire, short answers, and we'll rock these questions like we always do. So to start out, your favorite movie?
If it's a musical, Sound of Music. If it's a kind of a funny movie, I love that movie, Babe. And then probably The Usual Suspects, if you like a kind of a mystery thriller.
I like that one. That's a good one. I know that one. Favorite place to vacation?
So my wife and I have been taking our children to Maine for more than 30 years. So that's been something we've always carved out at least 2 weeks in the summer to go to Mount Desert Island, where Acadia National Park is.
Sounds beautiful. Favorite musical artist?
James Taylor. That's an easy one.
Favorite spectator sport?
Track and field.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
As I often say, track and field was a sport that was created to entertain the gods. Every other sport was created just to entertain humans.
Makes sense. I love that. What's the first thing you do in the morning?
Get up and exercise.
You run a marathon?
I don't run a marathon.
What's the longest run you do?
Well,
now?
So in the weekday, I'll do 4 to 5 miles almost every other day, and then on Sunday morning, if I'm up to it, I can do about 8 or 9.
That's awesome. Title of the last book you read?
Not the last book, but the book that I recommend is a book called Legacy by James Kerr.
Okay.
It's a book ostensibly about leadership for business leaders, but it's really a book about leading a meaningful life. So it's really relevant to both people who lead organizations as well as anyone who wants to find greater purpose in their work.
I look forward to reading that one. I haven't read it. Go-to advice for a new college grad starting their first job?
Say yes. When, I hear too often, well, I'm going to have to see if I have time and this and that. Just say yes. Saying yes will open opportunities. Supervisors, bosses, if they're asking you, it's because they need your help. Say yes, because they'll give you greater opportunities.
Do you know who else, a great Indianapolis civic leader who unfortunately we lost a couple of years ago, a guy named Jim Morris.
Sure, I know Jim.
Said the same thing.
Just say yes.
Absolutely. Best advice, other than this answer that you just gave me, best advice that you ever received?
We talk about the transfer portal. It didn't exist as a term, but when I was in college as a freshman at Yale, I called my father to tell him that I decided to transfer to the University of Virginia. And my father said, "No, you're not." So I was in the transfer portal for about 1.8 seconds. I don't know if it was the best advice, but it was the best directive, because what he was telling me was, yes, being a competitive athlete is really important, but he had the maturity to know there was a long view and that maybe I should also study a little more.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Jeff, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for doing the podcast with the Indiana 250 podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your leadership. You have had an outsized impact already in our state, certainly in Delaware County, in Muncie, and had such an incredible impact on so many students' lives. But you've also been a dedicated servant of our country, in the roles that we talked about. So thank you for all your great service, and we look forward to your continued great work at Ball State.
Well, Nate, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks, Jeff. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with the new Indiana 250 off-the-record conversation soon.